Palestinians, in going to the United Nations, are violating both the spirit and the word of signed commitments with Israel. It's clear they're abrogating signed commitments. They made a commitment in this peace process that started 18 years ago to solve all issues of contention through negotiations. Now, by refusing to negotiate and now by trying to impose through international diktat a solution, they are in clear violation of both the spirit and the letter of signed agreements. This is a violation of Palestinian commitments. This cannot help peace. Israel reserves the right to respond. We are following events very closely. We have different options. We will decide in our own decision-making process if, when, and how to respond. But it's clear that we reserve the right to respond. If one party breaks a signed agreement, the other party is totally within its rights to say business as usual cannot continue. We have, as I say, a range of options, and we are looking and have been over the last few months looking at possible Israeli responses. I would stress that we still hope it's possible to return to direct talks. We hope the Palestinian leadership picks up the ball and that we do restart the negotiating process, that we don't have a situation where we have some sort of crisis. We hope the diplomatic situation does not turn into a negative diplomatic crisis. We hope the situation here on the ground. I mean, ultimately, there's what's going on in New York and there's also what's going on here. We hope the situation here remains quiet. Palestinian leadership has said they want things to remain peaceful, and we will hold them responsible for that commitment. Once again, they have said they will want things to remain quiet here, that they don't want to see violence, and we will hold them to that commitment. In many ways, you could say the Palestinian leadership here is throwing the dice, because no one exactly knows how things will turn out at the United Nations. No one knows how it will affect matters here on the ground. And so we will respond in response to events that happen. Now, the Prime Minister has said, he said it at Bar Ilan, and he said it since, that he sees two fundamental requirements in getting a peace treaty. Not to start negotiations, but in getting a peace treaty, to have a successful end of negotiations. One is Israel's security concerns. The second element, not a precondition for talks, but we think an essential element in achieving a peace treaty, is, of course, recognition of Israel's legitimacy as the homeland of the Jewish people. This goes back to the very core of the conflict. In the eyes of our neighbor, is the Jewish state legitimate? The fundamental problem with the Palestinian bid at the UN is that it appears to be part of a Palestinian strategy to avoid negotiations with Israel. I think it's almost 3 years now that the Palestinians have refused to engage. Despite repeated calls by my Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu, to start substantive negotiations on the core issues, the Palestinians have, for the most part, refused to engage. And I would ask the Palestinians, if you boycott Israel, if you refuse to negotiate with Israel, how do you expect to make peace with Israel? Palestinian President Abbas wrote a piece for the New York Times a few months ago, and he seemed to be saying, we want a Palestinian state as a superior platform on which to conduct our struggle with Israel. We want a Palestinian state as a superior platform to continue our conflict with Israel. This is the very opposite of the Israeli outlook. From our perspective, Palestinian statehood is part of peace. It's part of ending the conflict, not a vehicle in which to continue the conflict. Israel does not want to have a situation where we have a hostile Palestinian state on our borders. In the General Assembly, There are more than 100 countries who, it doesn't matter what the Palestinians bring, they will support it. A knee-jerk diplomatic reaction. In other words, there are many who give the Palestinians a blank check. Now, if you have a blank check, it doesn't encourage you to be thrifty. If you have a blank check, it doesn't encourage you to be responsible or to show restraint or to be cautious. You have a blank check. Go out and spend it. And I think this is one of our criticisms of the way the UN has handled the Middle East. Because if the General Assembly, and it's not going to the General Assembly, we know it's now first going to the Security Council, but if there was to be some sort of maximalist Palestinian position passed by the UN, you would make a negotiated solution between Israelis and Palestinians just so much more difficult in the future. Because how can a Palestinian leadership, this one or a future one, negotiate away what they think is enshrined in UN legitimacy? You have a hardline position on borders passed by the United Nations General Assembly. How can a Palestinian leadership settle for less? And of course, Israel can never reach that benchmark. Never. If you have a hardline resolution, you're saying the Western Wall is occupied territory. You're saying the old city of Jerusalem, the Jewish quarter of the old city of Jerusalem, is occupied territory. It's not. Not the Western Wall and not the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. And so you're making an impossible benchmark. You're tying the hands of a future Palestinian leadership to negotiate peace with Israel on the issue of borders. Now, my Prime Minister has said he's willing to meet President Abbas here in Jerusalem. He's willing to go to Ramallah to meet President Abbas there. He said last night he's willing to meet President Abbas in New York. President Abbas is already there. We will be arriving tomorrow. We want to see a meeting. We want to see the restart of the peace talks between us and the Palestinians. And let me be clear. What my Prime Minister has proposed is the following. Ongoing peace talks at the highest level, peace talks that will continue until results are reached, peace talks in which all the core issues to the conflict can be on the table. The Palestinians can bring all their concerns, we will bring ours, and the idea is to find a historic peace agreement between Israelis and Palestinians. That is the only way to change realities. That's the only way to change realities on the ground here. At the very best, the United Nations can provide the Palestinians with a piece of paper. But peace and Palestinian statehood can only be the result of negotiations and a peace agreement with Israel. The Prime Minister is, in these matters, he is aware of the responsibility on his shoulders as the leader of Israel. He will be going through drafts. He's very aware that his address has, before the United Nations, has importance, and it's very important for him that he wants the words to be exact and precise, and he wants them to stand. He believes that his remarks must not only be in the news the next day, but they have to stand the test of history. And he's looking at this very seriously. He will outline Israel's core positions. He will talk as the leader of the Jewish state about the Jewish people's struggle against the odds to rebuild their homeland. He will talk about our connection to this land, about our historic rights. He will also discuss the tumultuous events going on in the Arab world, what's called the Arab Spring. He will talk about our desire for peace and reconciliation, to seek peace with our Arab neighbors, with the Palestinians, the idea of a two-state solution, 2 states for 2 peoples, one Jewish state, one Palestinian state. He will extend once again his hand in peace. And he firmly believes that his words will encompass the Israeli consensus, that the overwhelming majority of Israeli citizens will be able to unite behind his central messages.